First interview since Donald Trump's election. François Hollande speaking to France 24. Now, there he said that he still has, Donald Trump still has to dispel doubts. Marrakech, the opening round of the next round of climate change negotiations, the backdrop for the French president's first interview since that election of Donald Trump last week. Will the Paris deal be undone? Speaking of France 24, Radio France International and TV5, the French president insisted that the movement towards switching to green energy is irreversible, but Hollande also wondered how Trump will handle the Iran deal, Putin's role in Ukraine, and commitment to fighting terrorism. The point is, a Trump win impacts France's own presidential election next spring. And as the center-right gears up for Sunday's first round of U.S.-style primaries and Hollande struggles to mount a credible case for his own re-election, mainstream parties are more than ever chasing after the ever-growing electorate of far-right leader and Trump enthusiast Marine Le Pen. How can someone like Hollande win back the disenfranchised who've abandoned the left for the National Front? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about a tough climate for the French president. With us, Vivian Walt, correspondent for Time magazine. Thank you for being with us. We're also in the company of Gil Mahaley, who's a columnist for Yediot Aharonot and editorial director of Causeur.
Good evening, François.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to be going to the Climate Change Summit in Marrakech in a moment. Just to tell you, the France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Let's listen, if we can, to François Hollande speaking at the outset of that interview to our reporters about the changing mood since last Tuesday.
My
phone call with Donald Trump aimed to appease what needed to be appeased. He also wanted to have dialogue. France, which has a long history with the United States, wants a partnership with them. We have so many common interests, whether France, Europe, or the United States, and our common values.
Vivian Walt, Hollande, saying afterwards that there are worries and it's up to Trump to dispel the doubts. What was your feeling watching the French president there?
You know, you really have to feel for him. Firstly, he might himself be a lame duck president. He might be out of office in 6 months. Here he is trying to kind of reassure the French public and the world at large that the new leader of the US didn't really mean what he said he meant during the campaign. Very much the kind of role that Obama has been playing in the last 72 hours, say, trying to calm things down and say, look, it's not so bad. Both men really risk losing their entire legacy. I mean, the singular achievement of President Hollande's tenure is the climate deal, which could well now be in serious trouble despite his reassuring words.
Despite his reassuring words, and we don't have any more sense of what kind of a leader Donald Trump will be after listening to Hollande's interpretation of that phone call.
Well, who knows what really was said on that call, how long it was. I'm sure it was through interpreters. So you have to imagine that he's trying to put the best face on it in a little bit because, like Obama, the reality is almost too ghastly to contemplate. But in fact, Trump has been very forthright about what he's going to do in his first 100 days, and cancelling the Paris Agreement was really quite high on the list. Cancelling the Iran nuclear deal was high on the list. Forging a partnership with Russia was high on the list. Everything that Hollande and Obama and the EU have been working against for the last several years.
All right, let's pick up on those points. Beginning with the Iran deal. François Hollande saying the absence of a deal would be more dangerous than having one. And it was he himself who brought up Iran.
Yes, well, the question now is not whether or not this is a good deal. This was the debate of a year and a half ago. The question is what you do today. Well, some people think that Donald Trump made many promises there is one promise he didn't make, which is to keep his promises. So they think that maybe he will not keep his promises. It's possible.
It sounds like that's what you think.
I think it's a wild card, and what's worrying me is that there's a big wave in the West in general. People who are the losers of globalization are desperate to find a political response to their plight. Donald Trump seems to be the plan B, the last chance that they give to liberal democracy. If he fails, or to be more exact, if he fails them, I don't know what they're going to choose to do. And this problem is not only an American problem, it's a French problem, it might be a German problem, it's all over the world. The new system doesn't have a place for at least a third or 40% of Western nations. The economy just doesn't need them in order to function. Politically, it's impossible. You cannot continue like that. So if we put it in a larger context, the United States has already a very long history. They moved from an agricultural power to an industrial power. It was very, very painful. Donald Trump didn't invent populism in the United States. We know that, let alone the Civil War. What happened in 1932, 1933, there were farmers who were preventing sheriffs from foreclosure, and they were attacking banks. When Roosevelt became president, the country was on the verge of civil war. So,
are you saying that we could see these kinds of scenarios in the Rust Belt?
No, what I'm saying is that when the United States moved from an agricultural power to industrial power, it meant 50 or 60 years of serious crisis. Now we are moving from an industrial model to something else. And this something else, for the moment, is very advantageous to people who live in big cities, who have diplomas and have the capacities to deal in the globalization world. But they leave behind too many people. And so, this is what we are facing now.
So when François Hollande, when asked about the populist wave hitting France, said it's not in France's interest to be closed.
Of course, because...
Is he right?
France has the same problem. There's a geographer called Christophe Grilly. We all know him. They're talking about the France of the periphery. It is estimated that about 30% of French are disposable. I mean, the economy doesn't need them. The economy is functioning very well without those who 30 years ago worked in factories with 20,000 workers or 10,000 workers. We don't need them. In gas stations, everything is automatic. You go to the cinema, everything is automatic. Big newspapers with 1,000 or 1,500 journalists have today 150 journalists. The world has changed. Many people are out of job, and the new economy doesn't create enough jobs for them. If there were 5%, you write about it, you make a documentary, and you go on. When there are 20 or 30%, it's a major political problem.
All right, the French president calling on the United States to respect its carbon-cutting commitments. Well, not if Myron Ebell has his way. He hails from the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a think tank that's got funding from major oil companies. He's tipped to be the man in charge at the Environmental Protection Agency. He's a climate change skeptic, even though 16 of the last 17 years have been the hottest on record. To ask about this, let's turn now to John Sturman, who teaches system dynamics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, who joins us from the Climate Change Summit in Marrakech. This summit was supposed to be all about enforcing the deal fleshed out last year in Paris. I guess the agenda has changed slightly.
Well, so thank you, and you're quite right. The agenda has changed, but what is interesting is that a large number of the parties, the nations here, are asserting that they will continue to reduce their emissions, regardless of what the United States may or may not do under the new administration. And the civil society groups that are here, representing every aspect of society in the United States and around the world, are committed to redoubling their efforts to build grassroots support for climate action at the community, municipal, and state level.
The French president in that interview with us, John, saying that the movement towards going green is, quote, irreversible. Can Donald Trump, how big a spanner can he throw in the works?
Well, so first of all, we don't know what Mr. Trump may or may not do. He has already indicated after his meeting with President Obama that he actually would support key elements of what is known as Obamacare, the health care law. This is contrary to what he asserted in the campaign, and I think it's a very welcome development, both for health care in the United States and as a potential indication of willingness to be flexible and not adhere rigidly to what he said in the campaign. Having said that, if he does carry out what he promised in the campaign with respect to energy policy and climate change, it could mean that the United States would not follow through on its commitment made in Paris and could revert to fossil-friendly policies. Our analysis using the C-ROADS climate model developed by Climate Interactive, and your audience can go to climateinteractive.org and check this out for yourself. It's all free and fully documented. Our analysis shows that if Paris were fully implemented, it would reduce expected warming to 3.5 degrees by 2100. If the United States does nothing and reverts to the business as usual path, then the expected warming would be 3.7. So it matters, but it is not fatal.
And John, on that
point, in any event, yes, please.
On that point, can they do it? Can they like reopen coal plants? Can they start reopen abandoned mines, for instance?
So in theory, but in practice, coal is on the way out in the United States because it is simply not cost competitive with many of the clean renewable energy sources, wind, solar, and especially efficiency. Efficiency is already by far the cheapest and best way to reduce our emissions while providing people with the energy services that they need, a warm home, mobility, and so forth.
All right, so John
Sterman, not competitive.
John Sterman, you're saying that if the U.S. walks away from it all, it'll have a little bit of an impact, but not too much. I want you to listen to what France's former president, Nicolas Sarkozy, who's, by the way, fighting to get his old job back in next Sunday's first round of center-right primaries. He's calling for a carbon tax on U.S. goods if Washington reneges on its promises. Let's listen.
Eh bien, je demande que l'Europe se dote d'une taxe.
I'm asking for Europe to impose a carbon tax on all products coming from the United States if the US chooses not to abide by environmental regulations that we impose on our own companies. We cannot be in a situation where our companies have restrictions and yet we continue to import products from other nations who do not respect these same regulations.
John Sterman, how realistic is that?
Well, I'm not going to handicap your election, but I think the threat of border adjustment carbon pricing is probably not very productive. The risk is a global trade war, which would be harmful for everyone around the world. Having said that, we need a global price on carbon, and we need all the countries of the world to internalize the climate damage by pricing carbon either through an outright tariff or tax or through a cap and trade program. I think the country to look to for leadership right now on this issue is Canada. And you're aware, no doubt, of Justin Trudeau's policy to impose a quite substantial price on carbon in Canada. but in a way that gives the provinces flexibility as to how they will implement it. The experience to date, for example, in British Columbia, in the New England states where I live, in California, is that the price on carbon has not harmed the economy, and to the contrary, it has stimulated innovation, it has stimulated job-creating emissions reductions, for example, through the deployment of rooftop solar, wind, and efficiency, and that, on the whole, it is a win-win, where the economy wins, the people win, and the climate wins.
All right, we're gonna welcome at this point political scientist Bruno Cotres, who's joining our panel as well. Thanks for being with us, Bruno. Vivian Walt, are you reassured by what you've heard from John Sturman?
Well, I didn't know the figure that there was only kind of a marginal increase in the planet's warming if the US really pulls out of the deal. But I think that there were some things that John left out. One is that Obama's leadership on the climate issue has been really crucial globally. It hasn't just been a matter of the US. It's a matter of the fact that Obama actually had China sort of sign a joint deal, the two major powers in the world. And people I spoke to last year during the first climate talks in Paris said that without Obama basically traveling around the world, basically persuading all the skeptics to get on board, it would have been a very, very different deal. And so I think that it's not simply a matter of the US pulling out, it's a matter of the fact that we're losing the global leader on this issue.
Yeah, John Sturman, on that point, because you've got what's going to happen under President Trump if you've got that late night hard bargaining with the likes of China's Xi Jinping or India's Narendra Modi? Who's going to be doing it?
So we don't know who's going to be doing the bargaining, and I certainly agree that there is a worst case scenario in which the entire Paris process might unravel. But so far here in Marrakech, there's no sign of that, and indeed China has signaled explicitly that they intend to follow through with their commitment to peak their greenhouse emissions no later than 2030. And they have strong internal domestic reasons to do so, mostly related to air pollution and the health of their people. They have already also signaled that they expect the United States to continue to make progress on this issue. So I agree with the comment that there is a greater risk here that the agreement from Paris last year could begin to unravel, but so far that doesn't seem to be the sentiment here in Morocco.
Bruno Cotres, I've asked the rest of our panel, and I'll put it to you. What did you make, listening to that interview with François Hollande on France 24, RFI, and TV5? What did you make of him saying, look, he's trying to appease things at this particular time on issues like climate change? Were you reassured?
Not really. I would say that what I heard is obviously François Hollande, which is posing himself as one of the big state of the heads around the world, which is I'm talking with Trump, obviously, and we said with Donald Trump that we are going to continue to talk, we are going to continue to try to hear and to understand each other. And at the same time, he said that he do not really believe that Trump could do what he said during the campaign, and in particular, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement on the climate change, or also to renegotiate all the treaties and all the agreements. So I found that François Hollande, which is trying to calm down the situation, obviously, but at the same time, which is going to say to Donald Trump, look, we are a set of big countries. We are really asking you to take your responsibility as the US president. And so I found François Hollande, which was sending quite a firm message to Donald Trump on the issue of climate. But after all, it is just the beginning of the conversation between the two.
The beginning of the conversation, and as Vivian was saying, Hollande could be a lame duck president at this point.
Yes, that's the point, that François Hollande is at the end of the mandate, and François Hollande is not really a strong leader. If we think about the position of François Hollande in the EU Council, François Hollande is not the strong leader that obviously you could be, because he is at the end of the mandate. Also, François Hollande, we do not know if François Hollande will be candidate in a few weeks. So
At the end of that interview, it certainly sounded like it.
I think so. That was my feeling. Anyway, I believe since many weeks that François Hollande will be candidate, obviously. And between the lines, you could see at the end of the interview, he was more or less saying that, yes, he's going to be.
All right, we talked about one of the other points that Vivian Walt brought up earlier in the discussion, and that is the attitude towards Vladimir Putin when it comes to, for instance, Ukraine. The French president, a little bit cagey in that interview.
Yes, because there's a real problem, and we might be upset by some of Trump's propositions. But one of the big issues that explains his victory is that many Americans came to believe that Hillary Clinton means war, and that he means less American participation in the problems of the world. And when we talk about Russia and East Europe, there's a problem growing for 25 years, and things didn't begin with the invasion of eastern Ukraine and the Crimean Peninsula. The problem goes back to how far should Europe expand to the east? How far should NATO expand to the east? What do we do with the anti-missile shield? So there is a long debate, and Trump, in a very crude manner, conveyed the message that he will try to solve this. I don't know how he's going to do it, but he addressed the issue. And
did you get a sense, listening to François Hollande, that he's kind of accepted that NATO is going to draw down a bit on this?
Well, he accepted the question. What's interesting about Trump is not the propositions or the answer he gives, but the fact that many people find that he's addressing the right questions, that he's touching the issues. When he says horrible things about Mexicans, what he really says is that we have a problem with immigration, that we have to take control of our frontiers, and it's something that you can find all over the world, sometimes expressed in a more polite way. So I think he's credited more for addressing issues, and people ignore the terrible things he proposes in order to find a solution. It's like Fabius said about the Front National 30 years ago. They are asking the right questions, even though they give the bad answers.
All right, we're going to pick up on that point when we come back here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us.